Konnichiwa minasan, and welcome back to my channel. I'm Reina Scully, coming to you from Japan. This video is sponsored by Rosetta Stone, and today I'm going to teach you how to sound more Japanese, or how to improve your Japanese pronunciations. In principle, Japanese is actually very easy to learn the basics of pronunciation, mainly because it is phonetic and syllabic, so even if you sound clunky and awkward, you're still going to be able to communicate so long as you're accurate. The other helpful thing about Japanese is when it's written out in Romanized English, you read it exactly how it's written. We don't have any major outliers like PHs making an F sound, or Cs potentially sounding like K like in cake, or C as in cease. So an example would be something like Shinkansen. You read it exactly how it's spelled out, and even if you read it as Shinkansen or Shinkansen, everyone's still going to know that you're talking about a bullet train. The real struggle comes when you want to sound like a native speaker. Learning a different language and having the capacity to communicate can be done with effort and focus. However, the ability to mimic the sounds and intonations is more of a skill and requires mouth exercises. But that doesn't mean you can't hone that skill. You certainly can, and there are some tricks to help you along the way. Plus, I personally find it helpful to be explicitly told what to pay attention to, even anatomically, when I'm attempting to sound like a native speaker in another language, so I hope this video helps you in that way. Before we move on to the specifics of sounding Japanese, I wanted to thank Rosetta Stone for sponsoring this video. Rosetta Stone's a great place to start learning Japanese, especially for beginners. It acclimates you to the auditory components from the very first lesson, so you are immediately immersing yourself, which is extremely important when learning a language that is phonetically so different from something like English. The app is intuitive and keeps you on track on a schedule, which is really important because you need to pace yourself when learning another language, which isn't something everyone can do by themselves. So if you're interested in Rosetta Stone, be sure to check out the link in my description below. They are offering a Black Friday discount between November 25th and the 30th. Plus, they are offering a lifetime membership for $189. This is super limited, so be sure to check it out as soon as possible. First, let's talk broadly about how Japanese sounds. 日本語の発音は主にフラットだと言いますが、実はそうでもないんです。よく聞いてみると、声の上がり下がりが結構激しいと思いませんか? I'm sure you've all seen Dogen's hilarious video about how Japanese is taught to be rather flat when it's actually not. It's certainly flatter than English, but we have so many subtle intonations that you have to master in order to sound fluent. So let's take a look at the phrase お願いします. A fluent speaker would place stress and pitches as follows. お願いします. お願いします. And if you were to physically map out where the pitches lie, it would look a lot like a bell curve where the top is flat. お願いします. This is probably a little daunting when you're initially trying to figure it out, but it is important to learn because we have so many words that seem like homonyms. For example, 日本 and 日本 are two completely separate words. 日本 is Japan, where the hon is a little higher and more emphasized, whereas nihon is the counter for two, like two pencils, where the ni is a little higher and emphasized. Nihon. 鉛筆が2本あります. Another common example would be ame and ame. So ame is rain, where me ends on a lower note, and ame means candy, where me ends on a higher note. Learning where the stresses and pitches belong is inherently very difficult, and it can only be made easier with constant exposure and immersion, another reason why listening carefully to native speakers is so important. Now let's go over how our vowels are pronounced, as that will be the blueprint for all spoken Japanese. If you've seen my previous videos on hiragana and katakana, you already know that all of our letters, or kana, ends in a vowel except for So every row in our kana system rhymes, which should make things just a little bit easier. The most important column to become super comfortable with is the a column, or the first column, as it is the basis for our entire system. A, I, U, E, O. So in order, a like in father, I like in keep, U like in Uber, E like in bet, and O like in old. If you're an English speaker, it's important to dissociate Japanese kana from your understanding of the vowels A, E, I, O, U. I know it's kind of hard not to map them against each other, but try your best to compartmentalize English away from Japanese, and when practicing Japanese, only think in terms of a, I, U, e, o. Now let's talk about where in your mouth Japanese is articulated in comparison to American English. This might be a little tough to feel and visualize at first, but Japanese is spoken in the middle of the mouth, whereas American English is spoken at the tip of the mouth. So right now, since I'm speaking English, you can even see that I'm using my lips, my teeth, and my tongue touching my teeth in order to enunciate in English. でも日本語で話しているときはあまり口先や歯を使わずに話してます。基本的に舌は口の真ん中のところに集中して、ほとんど舌で歯を触ることがないはずです。If you listen carefully and try it out yourself, you'll realize that Japanese rarely requires you to move your tongue past your hard palate, which is the roof of your mouth. And the only Japanese phonetics that require you to use your lips to pronounce properly are ma, mi, mu, me, mo, ba, bi, bu, be, bo, and pa, pi, pu, pe, po. In the world of articulatory studies, those are called bilabial stops, as in you need both your lips to close and stop the airflow in order to produce the desired sound. There are a lot of ways to break down Japanese pronunciations, but I think one major way that I find really helpful to recognize are nasal consonants. Basically, 16 Japanese kanas have a nasal component to them, where the very last noise depends on the airflow coming out of your nose. So the nasal kanas are ma, mi, mu, me, mo, na, ni, nu, ne, no, ga, gi, gu, ge, go, and n. The way you can check or prove that these kanas are nasal is by pinching your nose closed and trying to say them. You'll find yourself making a subtle b, or even a choking noise because these kanas require you to have nasal airflow in order to pronounce them properly. Now let's go over what's arguably the most difficult column in Japanese, rarirurero. When written out in Romanized English, it's depicted as an R, but in reality, it's a lot closer to a hard L. I like to describe it as somewhere between an L and a D sound. To produce the sound, you almost want to snap your tongue off of the roof of your mouth. Ra, ra, ri, ru, re, ro, rarirurero. Can you almost hear that subtle, soft D noise because of that hard tap? Rarirurero, raku, rippa, rusu, renkon, roka. And finally, let's talk about another nuanced kana that's a little bit hard to perfect, hu. So hu kind of feels like it should be an F, but it's not true because you're not supposed to use your teeth against your lips in order to make that sound. What you really want to do is you want to make a tiny circle with your lips and just blow air through it, and it should produce a sound that's halfway between an F and an H. Hu, futon, fuwa-fuwa, fukuzatsu, fuke. All right, I think this is where I'm going to end this lesson. I do understand that it's really difficult to recognize and correct these subtleties. Language and speaking really starts at the brain, specifically the Broca's area, that's intuitively sending information to your mouth and telling it exactly how to produce words and sounds. By learning a new language, especially something that is so very different from your native language, is basically short-circuiting that language loop that your brain has already perfected. So it does take a lot of dedication, recognition, and mouth practice. But I hope this video was helpful to you and that you learned a little something new about Japanese pronunciations. Please let me know in the comments which Japanese words you find difficult to pronounce and whether you have any tips for fellow learners. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to Rosetta Stone for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to check the link in my description below. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you again for watching, and I will otherwise see you in my next video. Sonje matta ne! Ba, bi, bu, be, bo. Da, di, nu, ne, no, ga, gi, gu, ge, go.